Be getting some rain this week, and we could sure use it. And it should absorb this time because the ground's all dried and cracked. So there's plenty of holes for it to go into once we get it. So looking forward to a good week, and pray for John and Ty and the girls as they're gone, as they're traveling. I know they'd usually be here, and they'll probably peek in. I'm sure they'll listen to the service. But so remember them as they're traveling. Pray that they have a good time away. And then as they come home this coming weekend. Let's turn our Bibles to 1 Samuel. Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 13. First Samuel chapter 13, for our message today, we are going to talk about Jonathan. We are going to look at the character in the Bible named Jonathan and how he's a good example for us. Jonathan, of course, was the son of King Saul. He was also the friend of David, and the Bible tells us that he was a good man. He was a man of good character, and that's kind of what we want to focus on this morning. That's where we want to take our attention, is to some of the character attributes, some of the things that the Bible tells us about Jonathan, and the good character that he had. I'll look at three of these this morning. Okay, we'll break these down three ways. We'll look at three different stories of his life. But first of all, we want to talk about courage and how Jonathan is a good example to us of courage. Now in 1 Samuel chapter 13, 1 Samuel 13 verse 1, it says, Saul reigned 1 year. And when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. And the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. Jonathan apparently was directly over a garrison of 1,000 soldiers. So he had 1,000 soldiers under his control. And here in this passage, he smote a garrison of Philistines. And apparently he must have done a good job, because we're going to look here in verse number 5 now at the response. We're going to look at the response of the Philistines. In verse 5, it says that the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash eastward from Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves and in thickets and in rocks and in high places and in pits. And some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. And as for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. After Jonathan has this initial success, the Philistines are going to respond, and they are going to send a multitude into battle. It gives some numbers. It talks about 30,000 chariots. It talks about 6,000 horsemen. But then when it talks about the army, or it talks about the group that the Philistines were bringing, it just says there in that verse number 5, people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. The Bible will use a phrase like that when obviously you can't count them all. Now it's obvious that there are numbers that you can ballpark, right? 30,000, 6,000. But the number of soldiers that the Philistines are bringing, you can't even ballpark this number. You can't even guess at how many. It just says that it's like the sand that's on the shore in multitude. And this makes the people afraid. It mentions there in verse number 6 that they were in a strait. You probably heard the term dire straits, or technically a strait is like a narrow way that's supposed to connect two different waterways. That's what a strait is. But we use that term when we speak of people that are in a narrow situation or in a tight spot, a tight situation, a perplexing situation, right? Paul said, I'm in a strait betwixt two, and I have this desire and I have this desire. And so you're in a perplexing situation. You're in a tight spot, and the people began to be afraid. And it says here that after the Philistines started to come after them, people began to hide in verse 6. Caves, thickets, in the rocks, high places, pits. Some of them in verse 7 crossed the river to get away and find a safe spot. But Jonathan was not afraid. Jonathan was a brave man. And so we'll look at chapter 14, verse 1. Chapter 14, verse 1. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side. But he told not his father. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, and the people that were with him were about 600 men. Nahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. The people knew not that Jonathan was gone. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. The name of the one was Bozez, the name of the other Sina. The forefront of the one was situate northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. That's courage right there, right? When we've just read in a previous passage and we know how many men the Philistines have stacked up and we know what they are prepared to go to battle with, Jonathan is quite ready. Now, while other men maybe are running and they're hiding in what the Bible says, caves and thickets and behind rocks and crossing the river, Jonathan grabs his armor bearer and he just says to him, Come on, let's go. Let's go. We can do this. Now, two people against a garrison of Philistines does not sound very good. Doesn't sound very optimistic. But Jonathan is a man of courage. Notice again what it said there in chapter 14, verse 6. There's no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. He said it may be that the Lord will work for us. Now that's courage, that's faith, that's belief that, if I go with 1,000 or if I go with 2, really what will make the determination, what will really decide whether or not we're victorious is if the Lord's working. If the Lord is in it, it's not any restraint to the Lord. It's not like the Lord sits in heaven and pouts, well, there's only 2 of them, so, if only 2 go, there's no way they could be victorious. Jonathan's like, no, the Lord's not restrained. It's not like the Lord's hands are tied, and if the Lord gets a certain number of men, then we might be able to win. No, he is very much courageous. He's so courageous, some people might say it was silly, but he takes one man, his armor bearer, and says, let's go up there. We read in other passages, of course, probably around this time we're reminded of David in 1 Samuel chapter 17, the faith that he had when he went and when he fought against Goliath. And Goliath laughed, and Goliath was insulted that all Israel had to offer was this shepherd that had come from the fields. And yet David stood before him and said that I've come to you in the name of the Lord God of Israel. We remember that faith. We remember the faith here of Jonathan. 2 men going out against a garrison of Philistines. Jonathan was indeed a man of faith. He believed that God could win, God could give victory with 2 as much as he could the 1,000 that he had in the previous chapter. Now let's keep reading here. Verse number 7. 1 Samuel 14, verse 7, it says, And his armor bearer said unto him, Do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee. Behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. It's easy to follow men. It's easier to follow men that are courageous and faithful, isn't it? If Jonathan had showed hesitation or if he had showed doubt or if he had showed worry, people see that and people look at that. But when he showed great, great courage, his armor bearer is like, yeah, come on, I'm with you. If it's in your heart to go, I'm with you. And his armor bearer was going to follow him no matter. Verse 8, Jonathan, Behold, we'll pass over unto these men, and we will discover ourselves unto them. Now, that doesn't seem like the wisest plan. You would think if you're going to go with 2 against a garrison, you would try to hide, try to sneak up on them, right? No, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go and we're going to discover ourselves to them. We're going to let them know, hey, we're here. Verse 9, and if they say unto us, tarry until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say thus, come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign for us. If we discover ourselves to them, and they invite us to come and to continue this fight, that's our sign. We'll know that God has given us this victory. We'll know that God's delivered them into our hand. So verse 11 says, both of them discovered themselves under the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they've hid themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us, and we will show you a thing. Come on. You guys have finally decided to come out of the holes? Come on, we'll show you. We got something to show you. And I'm sure the intent there was deadly, right? We'll show you. We'll show you how to battle. We'll show you how to fight. Come on up here. We'll show you something. And Jonathan said in verse 12 unto his armor bearer, come up hither, or come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan. And his armor bearer slew after him. And at that first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men, within, as it were, a half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. In a small area, immediately, quickly, Jonathan and his armor bearer they've started this battle, and it says here they've already killed 20 in a small space. Like, these guys are come out fighting. It says in verse 15, there was trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled in the earthquake. So it was a very great trembling. And the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah and Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. That was a bold move. You would think that Jonathan was setting himself up for defeat. The Philistines, it says here, when it talks about the sharp rocks, and it talks about the advantage that they had, in the mountains, it seemed like they had the strategic advantage. 2 men going out against the Philistines with nothing but courage and faith. And you know what? They started to win. And in a very short time in this battle, within just that first half acre, they'd already killed 20 of them. And by then the noise was so great that Saul and his men were actually able to they're able to see what's happening. And the battle turned. The battle turned. It says there in verse 16 that their hearts, the men, the multitude, melted away. Do we have that kind of courage? That kind of faith? The Bible tells us that we're in a warfare. Now, ours isn't, as it says, against flesh and blood. We don't fight with people, right? Our battle's not with people. My fight's not with you. Our fight's not with each other. We wrestle against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The Bible tells us that we're in a spiritual warfare, that what we contend with is evil in the spiritual realm. And yet we are encouraged as well to have courage. The battlefield that we have is not out here. It's not in fields. It's often in our minds. It's in our hearts as we fight daily, as we struggle daily against evil, against evil thoughts, against indifference, against pride, against all of those things. The Bible tells us here about Israel that so many of them were afraid. But then it tells us about the courage of Jonathan and his armor bearer. And you set up two contrasting examples there with that. Now let's look here. Let's keep reading a little bit more of this story. Look at verse 19. 1 Samuel 14, verse 19. It says, it came to pass while Saul talked unto the priest that the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. Saul said unto the priest, withdraw thy hand. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle. Behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. It's easy to follow the winning side, right? Talks about the Israelites that were with the Philistines. You know, when the Philistines came with that great army, it was probably easy for a lot of guys to say, all right, we give. But now, even they see this battle has turned, this tide has turned, and now they join back up with the Israelites again. And in verse 22, it says, likewise, all the men of Israel which had hid themselves, remember those guys that were hiding in the caves and in the rocks? All those that hid themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Bethaven. Now this is a good example here where, yes, I will agree that it's better late than never. And I'm really glad that these Israelites came from behind the rocks and got out of the caves and joined in the battle to pursue after the Philistines. They were God's enemies. They were the enemies of Israel. And as the battle turned, they joined in. So yes, better late than never. But when you contrast that with the outright courage of a man like Jonathan, you know, he even further now stands ahead. Because he had faith when many men were hiding, when many had dunked into the caves, when many had run behind the rocks, and some had crossed over the river, and some had just given up and were basically ready to switch sides to save their own lives. He's like, you know what? I think we can do it. And he didn't even tell his dad. It says he told not his father, but he grabbed his armor bearer and said, let's turn this thing around. And through courage, 2 men, Jonathan, really, because he was the one that initially had the courage to go, but he takes his armor bearer with him. The courage of Jonathan turned this entire thing. You know, when we read 1 Samuel, we read a lot about David, and there's a lot in 1 Samuel that is preparation leading up to David. But don't forget, some of these stories here, these chapters here, deal specifically with the courage of Jonathan. And that was just a great example for us. You know, the Bible tells us that we ought to be courageous. When the Lord spoke to Joshua through the word of Moses, he told him to be strong and to be courageous. The Bible tells us in the New Testament to quit like men and be strong. The Bible tells us in Psalm chapter 112 and verse number 7, when it speaks of the righteous man, it speaks of him not being afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting the Lord. So we can and we should have courage. Stand ye strong in the Lord. And in Ephesians 6:10 tells us, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And then it goes on to give us our spiritual armor. It goes on to talk about the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. It talks about the breastplate, the helmet of salvation, all of those things. But it prefaces that with be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. So be courageous. Let's be people of faith. Let's not be people that run, people that hide, but people that stand strong to the battle that lies ahead of us. There is a spiritual warfare that we fight. There is a battle that we fight each day in our minds, in our hearts, as we try to stay victorious over the things of this world. Don't falter, okay? Don't falter in that. Be people of courage. Be like this example here in Jonathan. Let's turn over to chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18. So he's a good example for us in courage. Now, how about this secondly? A good example for us in loyalty and friendship. In loyalty and friendship. It's important to have good friends, isn't it? It's important to have people around us that are friends. They're loyal to us and we're loyal to them. We are an encouragement and a help to each other. It's good to surround ourselves and have people in our lives that we can count on. You know, no matter what, I can't guarantee you that tomorrow is going to be better than today. There's a chance tomorrow could be worse than today. There's a chance that trouble lies ahead of us. You don't want to surround yourself with people that are only going to be loyal and helpful and encouraging to you when things are great. You want people around you that'll be loyal and faithful and helpful when you need what? When you need help, when you need encouragement. Let's talk about Jonathan. 1 Samuel 18, verse number 1, it says, "It came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would let him go no more to his father's house. Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war. And he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. It came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth. And his saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward." Now you read from the early passage here, the early verses of chapter 18, that Jonathan and David had become good friends. And actually, if I say that, that's really an understatement, because you read the first couple of verses of this passage, and it talks about their friendship in the strongest of terms. Talks about caring. Jonathan cared for David, loved him more than he loved his own soul. Jonathan, do you think Jonathan ever got jealous of David? Now, you say, why do you ask that? Because do you know who Jonathan is? You guys remember who Jonathan is? He's the son of Saul. You know what that means? If Saul's king, guess who's next in line to be king? Jonathan. But when you read in the book of 1 Samuel, and you read how the prophet Samuel had come to David and has already anointed him king, and as the story in 1 Samuel progresses and Saul starts to shrink down into the shrivel of a man that he was, and David's story begins to take stage, and David grows in the love and in the hearts of the people of Israel, it really starts to become clear that, you know what? The Lord was right. David is shortly to be king and ruler over this nation. You know what that means? It means Jonathan's not going to be. Jonathan is the son of the king. He is next in line. But loyalty to David, friendship with David, you'd think, well, that seems weird, because David's the one that's going to take his job. David's the one that's going to take the kingdom. When you say, but it should belong to Jonathan, shouldn't it? Well, there was a loyalty and a friendship there that the Bible seems to tell us that there was no animosity. There was no jealousy. There was nothing but loyalty and friendship and love between these two. Now, Saul didn't get it. Saul was jealous. When they said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s, Saul's immediate reaction was like, that's it? They're only ascribing to me thousands when they've given him 10,000s. What's left but for him to take the entire kingdom? It says he eyed him from that day. From that day, Saul could only see David. Saul became so worked up and so focused on David, Saul became a lousy king in Israel. Now, he was the king over God's people. He was the ordained king over Israel, and he ruled over them for a large number of years. There was a large time Saul was not a great king. And one of the reasons why is that all of his focus and all of his attention was what? It was on David. It was on one man that he feared. Now in 1 Samuel 19, 1 Samuel chapter 19, notice in verse 1, it says, "And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee. And what I see, that I will tell thee." Now that's loyalty there, right? You actually see Jonathan's loyalty has transitioned to David. When Saul says, we got to kill him. We got to get rid of this guy, David. Jonathan tells David about it. He says, listen, Dad's really mad right now. You need to hide yourself for a little while. I'll go out with him to the field tomorrow. I'll kind of gauge the temperature of this thing, and I'll let you know what he says. I'll let you know what's going on. So in verse 4, he says, Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. He did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine. And the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? Dad, seriously, what are you thinking? I know you're mad at David, but don't you remember when, nobody would go out and fight this Philistine? Nobody would go out and fight this giant, and David did. And we all benefited from that. It says that a great salvation was wrought in all Israel. Dad, his works to thee have been very good. David's been loyal. He's been a great soldier, a great warrior. We've all benefited from it. Don't you think you're kind of going over the edge a little bit here, Dad? And so it says in verse number 6, Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again. David went out and fought with the Philistines, and slew with them a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and he sat in his house with a javelin in his hand. And David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin. We could all learn some lessons from loyalty and friendship in Jonathan. He stood by his friend, didn't he? And he spoke up for his friend. And he went to bat for his friend when his father was angry. And listen, physically speaking, Jonathan has everything to gain if David dies, doesn't he? If David dies, if David is killed, Jonathan's next in line to become king. But he spoke up for his friend. And listen, guys, this is the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with, okay? That will stand up for you, that will not only be an encouragement to you, but in the company of others will speak well of you. There's going to be a lot of people in this world, and you guys are going to grow up and you're going to see this. There's going to be a lot of people in life that are friendly to you and friendly to your face. And then when you leave, they're not as friendly. And they'll talk about you, and they'll say things about you. And it's sad. And I have to tell you the truth, we all do that sometimes. We're all rotten friends at times. But a guy like Jonathan, he doesn't just love David when David's around. He loves David when David's not around. And he speaks well of David. And he even spoke up to his dad. Dad, David's a good man. And he's done a lot of good things for us. And he's done a lot of good things for our country. Your anger is overblown. You're getting a little excited. And Dad, David's a good man. And that's loyalty, and that's friendship. The Bible tells us that a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. The Bible tells us about the friend that sticks closer than a brother. The Bible tells us about love and about loyalty. And Jonathan was a very good example of that. Be the kind of friend that Jonathan was, and try to make friends with people that are like Jonathan. To truly, truly be a friend is to be an encouragement, to be a help, to be, to love your friend when they're around and when they're not around. The best kind of friends that you can have are people that pray for you, people that love you, people that care for you, people that want to see good from you and for you. Jonathan is absolutely that kind of man. Look here in chapter 20. Chapter 20, verse 16. 1 Samuel 20, verse 16. Notice here. Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies." And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Now verse 27. Verse 27. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, "Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today?" And Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, Let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me get away, and I pray thee, let me see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not unto the king's table." Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, "Thou son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion?" Even Saul recognizes it. You standing up for David and you keep going to bat for David is to your own confusion. Son, this is to your own hurt. If David grows, if David becomes king, you lose everything. And unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness. You're not looking out for the good of the family, son. You see how Saul tries to turn him here? He talks about, loyalty to David. It's not good for you. It's not good for your family. Verse 31, "For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die." And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, "Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done?" Jonathan, even when his father approached him with it, "Son, this guy, loyalty to this man is going to cost you a chance to be king. Come on, just end it, just kill him." "Dad, no." What has he done? The Bible tells us, when it talks about loyalty, in the New Testament, when Jesus Christ gave an analogy or a parable, he said, that there's the part about counting the cost, right? Counting the cost to see if you're all in, to see that you're not just going to start this and not be able to finish it. There was a cost that Jonathan had to count. And I repeat this again, I've said it a couple times, but the more that Jonathan promotes David, the more that Jonathan is loyal to David, the less likely is that he'll ever be king himself. And yet Jonathan loved David, it says, as his own soul. Jonathan loved David more closely than any friend that he ever had. And he stood up for him, and he defended him. And Jonathan is a great, great example to us, okay, about friendship and about loyalty. So let's learn those lessons. Now, thirdly and lastly, let's talk about the impact that he had on David. A good friend, a good man of loyalty, a good man of courage and faith. Good people make an attempt to make it, put forth the effort, make the attempt to have a positive impact on those that they are around. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 31, 1 Samuel chapter 31, let's look at verse 1 and 2. 1 Samuel 31, verse 1 and 2. Notice here it says, "The Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, Saul's sons." A warrior to the end, right? Jonathan was courageous to the end, and the Bible tells us that Jonathan actually died in battle. He died in battle with the Philistines. But I want you to go to the next chapter, which is going to be 2 Samuel chapter 1. And I want you to listen to David after this, okay? 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 17. And David lamented with his lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son. And he bade teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. And behold, it is written in the book of Jasher, the beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ascalon. And of course, these are places that the Philistines controlled. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. We're talking about the king of Israel here. This was not a light thing. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thy high places. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? You see, David realized when Jonathan died in battle, how much he lost. The friendship, the loyalty, and the love that was between those two is not something that you can't compare it to any relationship, right? You can't compare it even to the relationship here that David had with his wives. It surpasses even the love of women. There was a bond there. There was a friendship and a togetherness there between these two men. Unlikely candidates as it might be, right? You would think that Jonathan, it was not self-serving for Jonathan to love David the way that he did. And I want us to remember that. And I want us to take that to mind, that the love that Jonathan had for David made an impact in David, because David saw that it was not self-serving. Jonathan did not love David for how, to his own promotion, to his own betterment. He just loved him. He was a loyal friend. And when Jonathan fell in battle, David realized what he had lost. I was my best friend. And the relationship they had made a long-standing impact in the life of David. Be that kind of person. Be the kind of person that when people look at you and they look at your life, there's an impact there. There is something that is meaningful there. Not self-serving, right? Not that seeks to promote its own glory or its own growth, but I think it's okay to say, be like Jonathan, right? Be someone who's courageous and faithful, loyal to the end, a friend who can be trusted, someone that loves unselfishly. Okay, I think that's really all I want to do today. Is I think we'll just stop there. Jonathan is a great example for us, a great character testimony in the Scripture, and I think it's somebody that we could take to mind and heart and say, you know what, that's a good model. He's not perfect. Obviously, none of them would be. There's no perfect model to model our lives after, but these attributes, Jonathan was a good man. So 2 things. Find you some Jonathans to make friends of, and tell you what, be a Jonathan to some people. I realize that you have friends, and when we say friends, the closeness of relationships is different, right? I have friends that I'm super close to, and I have people that are my friends, but they're not a lot of relationship there. But find you some people that are Jonathans, and find people that you can be Jonathans to, and build some good, strong relationships. And it'll benefit you, it'll benefit them, and it'll help us to learn about love and loyalty. All right? All right. Tell you what.